Hey guys. Tonight we're stepping back into a world so cold that your breath would freeze mid-air before your words even made it out. Imagine yourself standing outside a small wooden house somewhere in the American colonies, or maybe a stone hut in medieval Europe. Snow piling on the thatched roof like an icy blanket from the heavens. Inside, people huddle close, shivering under layers of wool, trying not to turn into historical popsicles. If you think winter now is bad, wait until you learn what they had to endure back then. Honestly, you wouldn't last a single night without a heated blanket or central heating. You'd probably start negotiating with a candle for warmth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment below with where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. I love seeing how many cozy corners of the world we're connected through. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself stepping through the frozen silence of a winter night hundreds of years ago. The world feels asleep, yet you can sense life hiding in every breath of fog and crackling ember. The cold presses against the wooden walls like an uninvited ghost, and you realize, surviving winter in the Middle Ages wasn't just about endurance, it was about imagination. People back then didn't have thermostats, or even reliable windows. Many homes were built with gaps wide enough for the wind to whistle through, delivering nightly reminders that nature always gets the last word. And still, families endured, some even thrived. You picture yourself there, wrapped in a patchwork quilt made of old clothes and rabbit fur. Your nose peeking out, numb from frost. The air smells faintly of smoke, pine, and something earthy, like damp soil refusing to die under snow. The silence of those nights wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. You could hear the creak of the beams, the shifting of frozen timbers, maybe the soft breathing of a cow in the shed next door. Back then, homes weren't insulated from the cold, they were part of it. The walls sweated in summer and froze in winter. Even stone houses, owned by the rich, trapped moisture like a tomb. The only true warmth came from fire, breath, and body heat. You think about it, fire as a luxury. Today, it's just an aesthetic thing we stream on Netflix. That crackling, cozy fireplace loop that plays beside a mug of cocoa. But in the 15th century, fire was survival itself. Losing it overnight could mean frostbite or death by morning. Some people slept so close to the hearth that they woke covered in ash. Others built small pits of coals beneath stone slabs, a primitive version of radiant heating. And yes, sometimes those slabs cracked, setting whole cottages ablaze. It's almost ironic that trying to keep warm could kill you faster than the cold. Still, there was something sacred about the night. People didn't stay awake scrolling through glowing rectangles. They listened to wind, to wolves, to their own hearts beating beneath wool. Sleep came early and heavy, often shared by several souls under one roof. Babies, grandparents, farmhands, all lumped together like logs in a human bonfire. Modesty? It froze somewhere outside, along with the chickens. You shift slightly, picturing that moment when someone stokes the last embers before drifting off. The glow dances across rough beams, catching faces softened by exhaustion. You can almost hear the whisper of a prayer, part habit, part hope, that the fire lasts till dawn. The smell of smoke settles into your hair, your blanket, your lungs. Everything smells like survival. The nights stretched endlessly. The kind where time doesn't pass, it lingers. Like breath on glass. You'd lie there, your mind wandering between waking and dreaming, half listening to the cold creeping in from the cracks. Some nights, people swore they could hear spirits moving outside. Others claimed the frost itself whispered names. Maybe it was just the wind, but in a world that's silent, even your own heartbeat could sound like an omen. And still, amid all this chill, life carried on. There were lovers whispering under furs, children giggling as they tried to warm their toes against their parents' legs, and dogs snoring at their feet like living heaters. Even misery found moments of laughter. Someone probably joked. At least the lice froze too. Humor was warmth in its own way. It kept despair from settling in. You might wonder what they ate before bed. Anything hot, stew, broth, ale thick enough to chew. Sometimes, they'd drink posset, a strange mix of milk, eggs, and wine, served warm. It sounds terrible, but in a freezing world, flavor ranked below temperature. And if that didn't help, well, there was always the old trick of sleeping with a rock heated in the fire, wrapped in cloth, and placed near the feet, a medieval precursor to the hot water bottle. Practical, until the cloth burned through. The night presses deeper, and you realize the most astonishing part: how quiet everything feels. No engines, no hum of wires, no city glow, just the soft rhythm of the fire, the distant bark of a dog, and the slow, steady breathing of those who've surrendered to sleep. It's almost peaceful, if peace can exist where frost paints your eyelashes. Historians still debate exactly how people managed to sleep through such conditions. Some say they never truly did, that cold made them restless, turning every night into a patchwork of naps. Others argue their bodies adapted, slipping into a slower rhythm that matched the season. Maybe they just accepted the discomfort, because what else could they do? You can't bargain with winter. You endure it, one breath, one ember, one heartbeat at a time. And as you imagine lying there, the room fading to shadow and smoke, you feel that timeless stillness, the kind that connects you to everyone who ever curled under a blanket, hoping the night would be kind. The fire crackles one last time before softening into embers. Outside, snow falls in silence, blanketing the world in white forgiveness. Inside, you drift with them, half awake, half dreaming, learning that even in the coldest centuries, the human heart always found a way to stay warm. The fire has died down to a sleepy orange glow, and you can almost feel the cold creeping back in. It presses through the cracks in the walls like an old enemy testing the locks. Your blanket feels thinner now, your breath heavier. Outside, the wind moans low, carrying the faint sound of snow shifting on the roof. You realize that, for most people back then, a house wasn't a fortress against winter. It was just another layer between their skin and the sky. Early American settlers and medieval Europeans didn't have insulation or weatherproofing. They had hope, mud, and muscle. Their homes were living creatures, breathing, creaking, leaking. You'd wake to find frost tracing delicate patterns on the inside of your windows, if you even had windows. Some families stretched oiled cloth or animal hide across the openings to block the wind. Though block might be too generous a word. The wind simply laughed, slipped through the seams, and found you anyway. The walls were made of whatever the earth offered: logs, clay, stone, even turf stacked like soggy bread. You could smell the rawness of it, the musk of wet soil mixed with smoke, sweat, and straw. It wasn't unpleasant, just human. Every sound echoed differently. A cough bounced off wood. A prayer sank into clay. The floor was often just dirt, sometimes packed so tightly it gleamed like stone. If you dropped your spoon, it didn't clatter, it sighed. And the ceilings? Low enough that tall men ducked even in their own homes. The heat from the hearth would gather there, trapped like a secret. Families sometimes hung herbs, garlic, or drying meat from the rafters, not just for storage, but because it was the warmest place in the room. Below that hung dreams, arguments, laughter, and the steady rhythm of life clinging to warmth. When storms howled outside, you could feel the whole house tremble. The roof groaned, the shutters banged, and you'd pull your blanket tighter, pretending the noise was just a lullaby from some angry god. People didn't just endure winter, they negotiated with it. Each crack patched with rags. Each draft fought with another layer of straw. Each prayer whispered into the smoke that rose through the chimney. And that chimney, oh, it was both savior and saboteur. Chimneys back then were not the proud brick towers we imagine. They were crude stone funnels, often leaking smoke like a gossip spreading secrets. If you slept too close, you'd wake coughing, eyes watering, too far, and frost nipped your toes. There was no middle ground, only degrees of discomfort, and yet, every home smelled like survival, like smoke that had stories. In some places, people built their houses half sunken into the ground. They called them dugouts or soddies, part home, part burrow. The earth around the walls helped trap a little heat, though it also brought dampness and worms. Still, when the blizzards came, those humble burrows stood firmer than the proudest mansions. There's a strange comfort in that. The humblest shelter often outlasts the grandest one. You imagine yourself crouching inside such a dugout. The roof leaks slightly, dripping meltwater into a bucket. You can hear it, plink, 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 a lullaby of survival. The air smells like clay and smoke, and your fingers tingle from the cold. Someone next to you shifts under the blanket, mumbling in half-sleep. You pull the furs higher, trying to trap your body heat before it escapes into the greedy air. There was an art to arranging a room back then. The bed went near the hearth but never too close. The children slept along the walls, layered in whatever fabrics were available: wool, linen, even old sacks stuffed with hay. Pets weren't pets so much as heat generators. A cat by your feet, a dog at your side, each one a small miracle of warmth. And if you think that's strange, remember, electric blankets haven't been invented yet, and fur came with a heartbeat. Humor, as always, was a survival tool. People joked that the best insulation was gossip, because it travels fast and keeps everyone warm. They laughed about how even the rats must be freezing. Somewhere, someone probably whispered, "If you can't beat the cold, at least make it laugh." You can almost hear it, the soft chuckles in the dark. Fragile and real. But there's something beautiful about how these homes adapted. Each one carried the marks of its maker: uneven beams, smoke stains, hand-chiseled hinges. They weren't built for comfort, they were built for courage. The walls, the roof, the hearth, they weren't just architecture. They were defiance carved in wood and stone. And when you think about it, that defiance lives on. Every time you close your window against the wind or wrap yourself in a blanket, you're reenacting a ritual as old as humanity. A quiet promise: the cold won't have me tonight. Historians still argue about which designs kept the most heat. Some claim timber homes breathed better, preventing deadly dampness. Others swear by stone for its ability to absorb and radiate warmth. In truth, both were flawed, but maybe that was the point. Survival wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. So you picture yourself lying there, in one of those crooked rooms where wind and warmth play tug-of-war. The fire flickers low, shadows crawl across the walls. And for a fleeting moment, the cold feels almost kind. Because in that fragile warmth, you can sense what kept people alive through centuries of frost: not comfort, not luck, but the stubborn, beautiful will to see another sunrise. And as you drift towards sleep, surrounded by the imagined creak of ancient wood and the breath of ghosts long gone, you realize something soft and humbling: those homes, however crude, were built not just of clay and timber, but of hope itself. The night deepens, and the house groans softly like an old creature shifting in its sleep. You feel the cold pressing closer again, sneaky, patient, curious, but there's still one defender holding it at bay: the hearth. The great fire, the red heart of the home. It doesn't just warm your body, it defines your entire existence. In a world where winter could kill, fire was your best friend, your god, and sometimes your worst enemy. You walk closer in your mind, drawn by that glow. The hearth sits like an altar: blackened stones, rough logs burning unevenly, sparks jumping like tiny souls escaping the heat. The smell of smoke and sap is thick, the air heavy with warmth that feels earned, not given. Every house had one, no matter how poor, because without it there was no life, no light, no laughter. And yet, the hearth was a jealous deity. It demanded constant attention, constant feeding. If you let it die in the night, you might not wake to see morning. People treated fire like a living thing. It had moods, sometimes roaring, sometimes sulking. You'd hear the crackle and think of it as purring. They fed it carefully, coaxing it to life with twigs and dry moss, blowing gently until a spark turned into a flame. Children learned early: never waste firewood, never anger the hearth. There were even superstitions about it. Some said you had to greet the fire each morning to keep the spirits of warmth happy. Others swore that spitting into the hearth brought bad luck. You can almost imagine the conversations. "Don't you dare insult the fire," someone might say. "It's listening." And maybe it was. The hearth wasn't just for warmth, it was the kitchen, the dryer, the storyteller's stage. People cooked over it, dried their socks by it, and sat around it long after supper was done, telling tales that glowed brighter than the flames themselves. The entire rhythm of life revolved around that small circle of heat. In many ways, the fire was the medieval version of Netflix. Everyone gathered, staring into the light, waiting for drama to unfold. Sometimes it did. Sparks could fly farther than expected, igniting curtains or straw floors. Chimneys, often built crudely, clogged with soot and belched smoke into the room. It wasn't rare for families to cough themselves awake, eyes stinging. Fire saved lives, but it also ended them. Some records speak of whole villages reduced to ash after one ember leapt too high. A simple bedtime mistake could erase generations in a night. And still, people kept lighting fires, because what choice did they have? You imagine sitting near that hearth now. Your feet finally thawing, your hands open to the glow. The heat doesn't just touch you, it seeps into your bones, making you feel human again. Behind you, others crowd closer, finding space wherever they can. The old man claims the best spot, muttering that he's earned it. A child yawns, half asleep, her face pink from the warmth. The dog sprawls on the floor, perfectly content, as if guarding paradise. In moments like this, the world shrinks. Outside, the snow still falls, silent and endless. But in here there's laughter, gossip, maybe even a song hummed softly under someone's breath. Someone stirs a pot of stew that's been cooking since dawn. The smell of onions, salt, and smoke fills the room. Your stomach growls, but you're too cozy to move. The hearth gave people more than heat, it gave them a center. A point to gather, to belong. Every night, as darkness settled, people leaned in closer, not just for warmth but for connection. Maybe that's why fire feels so hypnotic even today. Staring into the flames, you see the same dance that your ancestors watched for comfort. It's like the fire remembers you. Not everyone had equal access to warmth, though. In grand manor houses, multiple hearths blazed through the night, one in the kitchen, one in the hall, one in the Lord's chamber. Servants rushed between them, feeding logs, sweeping ash, and keeping the glow alive while their own fingers went numb. Down in the villages, one small fire had to serve an entire family. Children took turns sleeping closest to the warmth, like a rotating privilege of survival. It sounds cruel, but it was fair in its own strange logic. There's a story, half legend, half truth, of a woman in colonial New England who guarded her hearth coals through an entire blizzard. For 3 nights she barely slept, feeding the fire scrap by scrap while her husband was trapped in the woods. When he returned, the house was still standing, her hands blistered from tending the flames. That's what the hearth demanded, devotion. Even the ashes were precious. People saved them to make soap, polish silver, or spread on icy steps. Nothing from the fire went to waste. It was a cycle of giving, heat, light, then utility. The hearth didn't just warm bodies, it fueled entire economies of survival. Historians still debate which design was most efficient. The medieval, open hearth, sent most heat up the chimney, while later, enclosed stoves, trapped it longer. Some say this evolution marked the start of modern comfort, a tiny rebellion against nature's indifference. But perhaps, deep down, people missed the open flame, because with progress came distance. The hearth's roar became a whisper. Fire turned from companion to appliance. You lean closer in your mind, feeling that faint heat lick at your face. The crackle sounds like language you almost understand, ancient, rhythmic, comforting. Someone pokes the logs, and a shower of sparks flies upward, like orange stars escaping gravity. You follow them with your eyes, all the way up the chimney. imagining how far they'd travel before disappearing into the frozen night. And then, for a heartbeat, everything is still. The fire quiets, the house exhales, and you sense what it meant to live like this, to measure time not in hours, but in embers, to trust warmth as both miracle and burden, to fall asleep not knowing if the fire will hold till morning, but believing in it anyway. Because faith, in those winters, often looked like a glowing hearth in a dark room, and the promise that no matter how cold the world became, someone would always be there to keep the fire alive. The fire hums softly now, like a tired lullaby. You shift closer, feeling the last fingers of warmth reach for you through the chill. But warmth was never guaranteed. Even beside a good hearth, the cold had a way of sneaking in, through cracks, under doors, into your very bones. And that's where the art of layering came in. Not fashion, not vanity, pure, stubborn survival. You can picture it now. Somewhere in a colonial cabin, a woman pulling on her third pair of wool stockings, a farmer wrapping his legs in linen strips like some half-frozen gladiator. Children so bundled up that they looked more like laundry piles than people. Back then, getting dressed for bed wasn't about comfort, it was about strategy. You'd start with a linen shirt, soft, breathable, and close to the skin. Over that came wool, then more wool, then something fur-lined if you were lucky enough to own it. Even the poorest families tried to have at least one heavy garment, for the cold nights. That garment would last for years, patched and repatched until it resembled a quilt more than a coat. In the flicker of firelight, you'd look less like a person and more like a moving rug. But the layers didn't stop with clothing. The beds themselves were architectural marvels of layering. Picture it, a straw mattress, topped with feathers, then blankets, then animal hides, then maybe another quilt, and finally, you. Climbing into bed was less slipping under the sheets, and more descending into a textile cave. If you moved too suddenly, you risked breaking the entire ecosystem of warmth you'd carefully built. Of course, this layering system had its issues. You couldn't move much. You couldn't really breathe freely. And if you needed to get up in the middle of the night, well, let's just say the decision between freezing or staying put wasn't easy. People often joked that undressing for bed was the most dangerous thing you could do in winter. Why tempt death with bare ankles, they'd laugh. And honestly, they had a point. You can imagine it now, you. Tucked under layers so heavy that turning over feels like shifting continents. The air between each blanket acts like insulation, trapping heat from your body. The science makes sense, but back then it was instinct. You didn't need a degree in thermodynamics to know that adding one more blanket could mean the difference between sleep and shivers. And those blankets, they were precious. Wool was the gold of winter. People traded for it, guarded it, sometimes even stole it. Old clothes were unraveled and rewoven into crude quilts. Women spent long hours spinning and sewing, their fingers cracked from the cold, creating something that might keep a child alive through January. Each stitch was a quiet act of defiance against the frost. There were strange tricks too. Some slept with heated stones wrapped in cloth. Others with small iron pots filled with coals, bed warmers. The idea worked, until it didn't. Too much heat, and you'd scorch your sheets. Too little, and you'd wake with frost decorating your eyebrows. There's a diary from the 1600s where a man proudly writes that he slept with warmth till dawn, after placing a brick in his bed, proof that innovation doesn't always need to be glamorous. And yet, despite all this effort, mornings were brutal. You'd wake to find your breath frozen on the inside of your blanket. The first step out of bed was a test of courage. Your toes would meet a floor so cold it felt like punishment for surviving the night. Sometimes, people wore their daytime clothes to bed just to avoid the shock of redressing in the morning. And yes, that meant sleeping in dirt-streaked garments that smelled like smoke and sweat, but when the alternative was hypothermia, pride froze faster than water. Still, humor found a way. If you can't feel your nose, at least you know it hasn't fallen off yet. Someone would joke. Families teased each other about who snored loudest, who stole the covers, who nearly rolled into the fire. There's a peculiar warmth in shared discomfort. It binds people tighter than any blanket. Some historians believe this obsession with layering influenced fashion itself. The idea of undershirts, petticoats, vests, all practical beginnings that later turned stylish. So next time you see someone strutting in 5 layers of winter couture, just remember, they're following a centuries-old survival guide. There were also cultural nuances. In Northern Europe, fur-lined cloaks were a symbol of wealth. In early America, quilts were a badge of ingenuity. Some communities even had special nightcaps to keep ears and hair from freezing. You can almost see it, everyone tucked into bed. Tiny wool hats bobbing above blankets like a field of mushrooms. If it weren't for the frost creeping through the window, the whole scene might look almost cozy. But nothing was truly cozy back then. Comfort was a rare visitor. The layering, the fire, the shared beds, all of it was a fragile defense against nature's indifference. You didn't sleep soundly, you survived the night in installments. Each morning was a small victory, greeted with stiff fingers and grateful breaths. And yet, there's something deeply admirable about it. The simplicity, the endurance. These people didn't need perfect warmth to rest. They needed hope, and maybe a good blanket. In that sense, you're not so different from them. You, too, stack small comforts against the chill of your own world, a hot drink, a playlist, a soft sweater, layers of modern survival. Historians still argue about how effective all this layering really was. Some claim it trapped too much moisture, making people colder in the long run. Others believe it was genius, a primitive but effective insulation system. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. After all, they lived through it, didn't they? That's proof enough. So now, as the fire sighs and the last ember flickers low, you imagine lying beneath your mountain of fabric, half dreaming, half aware. Outside, snow covers the land like silence made solid. Inside, you are a cocoon of breath and heartbeat. The cold presses against the walls, but it can't quite find you, not yet. And in that fragile warmth, you understand what every winter sleeper once knew. Survival isn't about escaping the cold. It's about learning how to share space with it. One layer at a time. The fire has burned down to a shy glow, its last embers pulsing like sleepy hearts. You pull the blanket closer, sinking deeper into the layers. But as the chill tightens its grip again, a thought creeps in. What if all that fabric still wasn't enough? What if no matter how many layers you wrapped around yourself, the cold still found a way in? Back then, people had a simple, slightly awkward solution: share the warmth. Literally. Sleeping alone was a luxury very few could afford. In the brutal winters of the Middle Ages and colonial America, warmth was communal. Entire families, friends, travelers, even strangers, shared the same bed to keep from freezing. And it wasn't as scandalous as it might sound to modern ears. It was just practical. Body heat was the most reliable heater there was. You can imagine it: a creaky wooden bed, the straw mattress lumpy and loud, covered in heavy quilts and hides. Beneath them, 2, 3, sometimes 5 bodies lined up like logs. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, wool, and wood smoke. Someone's elbow is in your ribs. A child's foot digs into your stomach. The dog sighs from somewhere near your feet. And still, everyone sleeps, because exhaustion trumps discomfort. There's an old saying from New England: the family that sleeps together survives together. It wasn't sentiment, it was physics. Shared warmth meant shared life. Even unmarried travelers often bunked together. A practice called bedfellowing. It sounds strange now, but it was once common across all of Europe. Inns rarely offered private rooms. You'd pay for a space in a bed, not for the whole thing. Some inns even crammed 3 or 4 strangers together under one cover. Imagine booking that on Airbnb today. Shared bed. Bring your own blanket. Snoring optional. Of course, this led to some very human situations. There are letters and diaries from the 17th century full of comedic complaints. People waking up spooning a stranger or discovering their bedmate had stolen all the covers. One man wrote that his traveling companion snored like a drowning bear, and that he'd rather face frostbite than another night of it. But even through the grumbling, there's a sense of resigned humor. When death by cold was a real possibility, a bad snorer was a small price to pay. For families, the sleeping arrangements were intimate in a different way. Parents often slept with infants to keep them alive through the night, their bodies acting as living incubators. Older children piled in wherever they fit. Privacy was as thin as the morning frost. But affection ran deep. There's something profoundly human about that closeness, the steady rhythm of shared breathing. The warmth of another heartbeat just an inch away. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought. But picture the alternative: sleeping alone in a room where the air itself feels sharp enough to cut. The cold creeping across the floor, up your bedposts, whispering against your skin, a body beside you, no matter how sweaty or snore-filled, suddenly feels like grace. Even animals joined the nightly congregation. Cats, dogs, even chickens sometimes shared the bed. In rural areas, animals often slept indoors to protect them from predators and frost. Their body heat helped keep the room warmer. There's an old European term for this: the 3-dog night. It means the night was so cold, you needed 3 dogs just to make it through. Think about that next time your pet hogs the blanket. You're participating in an ancient survival ritual. The wealthy, of course, had a more refined version of this. In castles and manors, beds were enormous, curtained with heavy velvet drapes that trapped heat inside like a private climate zone. Servants might sleep on the floor nearby, both for protection and to be within reach when the master called for more firewood. Even in their luxury, the rich couldn't escape the cold, they just built taller barriers against it. And yet, despite the discomfort, these nights of shared sleep built something that modern life often lacks: intimacy without pretense. You couldn't hide who you were when you snored in someone's ear or stole their blanket in the dark. Families bonded over these tiny frictions. Children whispered secrets before drifting off. Parents hummed lullabies to keep fear and frost at bay. Every creak of the house, every rustle under the quilts, reminded them that they weren't alone. There were, of course, boundaries. Custom dictated which side of the bed belonged to whom, and where strangers could sleep. In some colonial households, guests of the same gender were offered the spare side without hesitation. In others, strict moral codes demanded separate sleeping spaces, even if it meant freezing. People balanced survival and decorum like tightrope walkers over an icy pit. Historians still debate how common bed sharing truly was. Some say it was nearly universal among the poor. Others argue it depended on the culture, the season, and the size of the home. But one thing's certain: few people truly slept alone in winter. Solitude was a privilege reserved for those with wealth and good insulation. You think of it now, how quiet the room must have been once everyone settled. The fire faintly whispering, the breathing of sleepers sinking into a rhythm older than language. Maybe someone muttered in their dreams. Maybe a baby whimpered and was soothed by a gentle hand. And outside, the snow continued to fall, relentless and uncaring, but inside that cocoon of bodies and blankets, there was warmth, a fragile, human miracle. It's strange, isn't it? In a time when people had so little, they found comfort in each other's nearness. Today, we have heated rooms and memory foam mattresses. Yet loneliness often lingers colder than any frost. Back then, warmth meant connection, to touch, to share, to breathe together. That was survival. And as you imagine yourself nestled among those sleepers, the world outside vanishing into white silence, you feel a small truth stir within you. Maybe the best kind of warmth isn't the kind that burns, but the kind that breathes. The fire gives one last lazy crackle before collapsing into a bed of glowing coals. Around it, the night is hushed, except for the quiet symphony of breath and rustling blankets. You've already met your night companions. But now comes the etiquette. The rules of proximity that made those long winters bearable. The art of bedfellowing wasn't just about sharing warmth, it was a social ritual. A tangle of comfort, courtesy, and comedy. To modern ears, it sounds strange, sleeping side by side with someone who isn't your partner. But in the Middle Ages and early America, it was perfectly normal. You could share a bed with a friend, a coworker, a fellow traveler, even a stranger, and no one would raise an eyebrow. It was a necessity, not an intimacy. Beds were scarce, rooms smaller, and the cold didn't care about propriety. What mattered was surviving till dawn with all your fingers intact. There was, however, a certain code to it. If you were invited to share a bed, you had to follow the unspoken rules. Rule 1. Always sleep on your assigned side. No rolling, no wandering. Rule 2. Don't steal the covers. Doing so could spark a feud colder than the air outside. Rule 3. Keep conversation brief. Bed was for rest, not gossip. though gossip still happened. And Rule 4, perhaps the most crucial: no unsolicited warmth sharing. You kept to your space unless the situation demanded extreme diplomacy. Diaries from the 17th century are full of awkward accounts. One traveler writes of waking to find his bedfellow pressing too near for comfort, prompting a swift elbow and a very frosty silence until morning. Another confesses he was grateful for the company, despite the snoring, the sighing, and the perpetual search for blankets that were never there. Humor helped. The best way to endure shared beds was to laugh about them later. In taverns and inns, bed sharing was practically a civic duty. The innkeeper might cram 3 strangers into a single bed and wish them good night with the cheer of a man who didn't have to participate. Travelers learned to accept it as part of the journey. Imagine walking into a crowded inn on a freezing night, exhausted, half frozen, and hearing, "A bed's free, though you'll be sharing it with 2 others." You'd nod gratefully, crawl in, and by the time dawn arrived, you'd know more about your bedmates' sleeping habits than their names. There's an old English folk tale about a merchant who woke one morning in an inn to find a stranger's foot pressed against his cheek. Instead of anger, he supposedly smiled and said, "Well, at least one of us is warm." You can almost hear the sleepy laughter echoing in that smoky room. In a way, it captures the spirit of those times, when discomfort was common, and grace was found in laughter. Even among the elite, bedfellow customs persisted. Noblemen often shared beds during travel, and students at universities like Oxford or Harvard slept 2 to a mattress well into the 18th century. Letters from the time reveal that these arrangements often forged strong friendships. After all, it's hard to maintain social distance when your elbow is someone's pillow. The intimacy of shared sleep blurred social lines, if only for a few hours. Still, there were moments of tension. Cultural modesty varied wildly, and what was acceptable in one village might be scandalous in another. Some Puritan families in colonial America began enforcing strict rules: men with men, women with women, and never the twain shall meet. One church record even mentions a young couple fined for lying together before lawful vows, a reminder that warmth could quickly slide into moral peril. Yet, despite the scolding sermons and icy punishments, people continued to share beds. Because again, the cold didn't care about your reputation. But not all customs were about survival. In some places, bed sharing became an act of hospitality. Offering your bed, or a space in it, was a gesture of generosity. Guests who were truly welcome were invited, under the blanket, a phrase that carried both warmth and respect. To refuse such an offer was considered rude, even insulting. Imagine a world where kindness was measured not by gifts, but by shared body heat. You might be wondering how people managed personal hygiene in such close quarters. The truth? They didn't, at least not by modern standards. Baths were rare, laundry rarer. Most people simply accepted that life and sleep came with smells. There are accounts of travelers sleeping fully clothed, boots and all, because removing garments meant facing the freezing air. One woman wrote in her journal that she and her sister would snuggle till we smelled the same. Romantic, in a rustic sort of way. There's something almost tender in that picture. The simplicity of it, stripped of luxury. People learned to value small mercies, the warmth of another body. The sound of shared laughter before sleep. The relief of waking up alive. You didn't choose your bedfellows, fate, or the innkeeper did. But you shared the same fire. The same fears. The same fragile humanity. Historians still debate whether people truly slept soundly in such conditions. Some suggest that communal sleeping led to lighter, more restless nights. Others argue it fostered security. After all, no one froze or faced the dark alone. Maybe both are true. Survival has never been tidy. And as you picture it now, the crowded room, the muffled snores, the creak of straw beneath shifting bodies, you realize how strange and beautiful it is that warmth, one of life's simplest needs, could weave such complex patterns of connection. You lie back in your imagination, surrounded by phantom bedfellows. The air smells of wool and wood smoke. Someone beside you exhales deeply. The sound rhythmic, soothing. Outside, the wind howls. But here inside, there's a heartbeat of shared endurance. The kind of closeness that makes the world a little less cruel. And before your mind drifts off completely, a thought lingers. A truth whispered softly through the centuries. No one survives the cold alone. The night stretches long and silent, save for the occasional pop from the fire and the slow rhythm of breathing in the dark. You can almost feel the weight of the blankets pressing down, a familiar comfort in a world where warmth is borrowed, not guaranteed. Tonight, you lie beneath what they once called feather mountains. That's what the old-timers nicknamed their beds. Mounds of quilts, straw, and feathers so thick they nearly swallowed you whole. It sounds cozy, doesn't it? A mountain of softness, built from whatever scraps of comfort people could gather. But these feather mountains were both a blessing and a curse. They kept you alive, yes, but they also trapped you. Pinned like a fossil under centuries of fabric. Getting up in the middle of the night wasn't just inconvenient, it was a negotiation with gravity and sanity. You start with the mattress, if you can call it that. Most poor families slept on sacks stuffed with straw, hay, or reeds. The rich had feather beds, literal bags of goose feathers sewn into heavy linen. Over time, the feathers shifted, clumped, or escaped through tiny holes, sticking unsuspecting sleepers in awkward places. It was like lying on a rebellious cloud. Every few weeks, you'd have to shake and fluff it. Otherwise it compacted into a lumpy disaster. And the straw mattresses? Well, those had their own personality. They creaked, they flattened, and if you were very unlucky, they moved. Mice loved them. Still, you couldn't deny their warmth. The trick was layering. On top of the straw went woolen blankets, furs, and the prized feather bed. Then came more blankets, more quilts, and sometimes even cloaks or rugs. It was said that in the coldest parts of northern Europe, people slept beneath enough bedding to smother a small horse. There's a letter from the 1500s where a woman jokes that she needed a bell to summon help if she ever rolled too deep under the covers. You smile, because you can almost picture it, a tiny hand poking out from the blanket mountain, waving weakly for rescue. The wealthy turned bedding into art. Their quilts were embroidered with family crests. Their canopies lined with velvet. Their pillows stuffed with down finer than snowflakes. Curtains surrounded their beds on all sides, trapping both heat and secrets. For them, warmth was status. The more layers you could afford, the less you resembled the shivering masses. In castles and manors, entire bedrooms were designed around the bed's position near the hearth, like planets orbiting a sun of stone and fire. For everyone else, beds were communal projects. Mothers and daughters sewed patchwork quilts from whatever fabric they could salvage, old tunics, worn-out aprons, even burlap sacks. Each piece carried a memory. You might pull the blanket over yourself and see a square that once belonged to your father's winter coat, or your child's first shirt. Sleep became a nightly reunion with your own history, stitched into cloth. There were rituals, too. Before bedtime, someone always turned the bedding, fluffing the straw, shaking out the feathers, brushing off whatever crumbs, ashes, or uninvited creatures had accumulated during the day. In some regions, people sprinkled herbs like lavender or mint between the layers to mask the ever-present smell of sweat and smoke. It worked, somewhat, at least until the next week, when the scent was overpowered by reality. You imagine climbing into one of those feather mountains now. The room is freezing, the air sharp as a knife. You lift the heavy quilt. It feels like hoisting a boulder and slide beneath, gasping as the cold sheets bite your skin. Then, slowly, the warmth builds, rising from your body, spreading through the layers. It's like lighting a secret fire beneath the blankets. For a few moments, you feel safe, hidden from the howling night. The wind may scratch at the shutters, but it can't reach you here. Of course, there were complications. Too much layering could turn dangerous. Fires were common in winter, and thick bedding burned fast. People were known to wake to smoke, trapped by their own fortress of fabric. In some places, bed frames were built high off the ground to escape the drafts and the rats, but that made them perilously close to hanging tapestries or candles. Survival required constant awareness, even in your sleep. There's something fascinating about how much effort went into preparing for rest. You didn't simply go to bed. You built your bed each night like a ritual of gratitude. You tucked in every corner, shook every feather, adjusted every fold. You whispered to the blankets the same way someone might whisper a prayer. Keep me safe till morning. And yet, the simplicity of it all feels beautiful. No gadgets, no thermostats, no electric hum. Just human hands crafting warmth from nothing. Every quilt a story. Every straw mattress a compromise between comfort and necessity. There's a lesson in that, isn't there? That maybe warmth means more when you've earned it. Historians still debate how effective those featherbeds were. Some argue they were inefficient, trapping moisture and harboring pests. Others insist they were miracles of early insulation, centuries ahead of their time. The truth probably lies in between. Like so much of medieval life, it was imperfect, but it worked. And somewhere in the middle of the night, as the house sighs and the snow thickens, you feel a kinship with those long-ago sleepers. The weight of the blankets, the faint smell of smoke, the creak of the floorboards, it's all strangely familiar. You realize that no matter how far we've come, some things haven't changed. We still crave that same cocoon of safety. That same illusion that the world outside can't touch us. You breathe in slowly, imagining feathers settling like soft snow around you. The warmth grows, gentle and steady, pulsing with life. And before you drift off, you understand something ancient, something they must have known too. in a world full of cold and chaos. The bed you build becomes your only kingdom, your private mountain of peace. Where warmth is the closest thing to love, the night has deepened into that fragile hour when the world holds its breath. You can almost hear the quiet ticking of cold ice forming on the window frame. Frost stretching across the roof like silver lace. Everyone is asleep now, buried beneath their feather mountains. Lost in dreams. Everyone, except one. Somebody has to keep the fire alive. Every household had one, the midnight fire tender. Their job was simple and cruel: stay awake, feed the hearth, and make sure the flames didn't die before dawn. It sounds romantic now, but back then, it was a matter of life and death. One moment of neglect, one log forgotten, and by morning the entire room could be filled with breath that no longer turned to mist. You imagine it. The faint glow of embers. The air heavy with smoke and silence. The tender sits near the hearth, wrapped in a wool cloak that smells of ash and damp. Their eyes are red with fatigue. Their hands blackened from the day's labor. Each time the fire crackles low, they lean forward, stir the coals, and add another log, whispering under their breath like a priest feeding a holy flame. In medieval Europe, this task often fell to the youngest, the poorest, or the most obedient. Servants, apprentices, and sometimes even children took turns keeping watch. It was an act of responsibility and fear. Falling asleep could mean punishment or worse. The fire was the household's lifeline. Losing it meant hours of labor to rekindle it from flint. Or a desperate trip through the snow to borrow flame from a neighbor. There are recorded cases of families trading bread or milk just for a few live coals. Fire was that precious. You can almost feel their exhaustion. The night stretches endlessly, shadows crawling up the walls. Every creak in the wood sounding like a whisper from something unseen. Outside, wolves howl, distant, haunting, and snow slides off the roof with a thud that jolts the heart. The fire tender startles, then chuckles softly to themselves. It's only snow, they murmur, though the cold makes even small noises sound ominous. To stay awake, some chewed on bark or dipped rags in vinegar and sniffed them, primitive caffeine. Others hummed to themselves, the same tune over and over until it became a heartbeat against the silence. And sometimes, in the half-light, they talked to the fire itself. The way you might talk to an old friend. "Stay with me," they'd whisper, "just until morning." There was a strange intimacy in that ritual. Humans and flame, two fragile lives depending on each other. One needed wood, the other warmth. It's easy to forget how a live fire feels when you stare at it long enough. The way it shifts colors, gold, orange, blue, like it's breathing. The way it sighs when you feed it, or snaps in protest when the wood is wet. The fire tender understood it better than anyone. Of course, not everyone stayed awake willingly. Many drifted off in the flickering light, only to wake choking on smoke or the chill of dying coals. Fires, when neglected, were treacherous. Too little fuel, and it froze. Too much, and it flared, spitting sparks onto straw floors. There are grim stories. Houses that burned down because someone nodded off. Families who never woke. You imagine the horror of that moment. The realization too late that warmth had turned against them. But there were triumphs too, quiet, unseen victories. A mother watching over her children. eyes heavy, clutching a stick to stir the embers every hour. A servant humming softly as snow drummed against the shutters. A farmer's wife who kept the flame alive through a 12-hour blizzard. Feeding it scraps of furniture when the woodpile ran out. Each one a tiny miracle of endurance. Lost to history but no less heroic. You think of them now. Those nameless watchers. They didn't just guard the fire, they guarded the night itself. While others dreamed, they listened to the breathing of sleepers. The whisper of wind, the sigh of the chimney. They were the pulse that kept the household alive. And maybe, in those long hours of solitude, they found something rare, peace. Historians still debate how often fires truly died overnight. Some say it was common. Others believe families learned to bank the coals, burying them in ash before bed so they'd smolder safely till morning. A clever trick, centuries before thermostats. Even then, fire management was a science disguised as superstition. Every family had their own method, their own whispered instructions passed down like sacred knowledge. There's one old English phrase that captures it perfectly. Keep the heart, and the house will live. The heart, of course, was the hearth. Lose that, and everything else followed: warmth, food, even hope. You can almost feel how much meaning that simple task carried. Now, imagine yourself in that role. It's past midnight. The world outside is frozen solid. The moon pale and distant. The room flickers with the faint light of dying embers. You kneel before the hearth, poke the coals, and feel a small wave of heat brush your face. For a moment, it feels like the fire knows you're there, that it's grateful. You add another log. It catches slowly, the flame licking up like a sleepy smile. The shadows retreat just a little, and the air hums with that soft crackle, the sound of survival. Behind you, the others stir in their sleep, unaware of the small act of devotion saving them. And you sit there, eyes half closed, hands outstretched, wondering if this is what faith really means. Not grand gestures or spoken prayers, but the quiet persistence to keep one light burning through the longest, coldest night. So you stay, watching, tending, breathing in rhythm with the fire. The hours pass, unnoticed. The first hint of dawn slips through the cracks. Gray and gentle, the house stirs awake. You smile faintly. Stretch your sore arms, and whisper to the embers, "You made it." Because that's what survival was then, a conversation between warmth and willpower. And for one more morning, both had kept their promise. The night quiets again, the wind softens, as if exhausted from its own fury. Somewhere, a rooster crows too early, fooled by the pale shimmer of moonlight. But dawn is still hours away, and inside these homes, the smallest hearts are stirring. Children, the children of the frost. You can almost see them, little faces peeking out from under quilts. Cheeks pink from cold, noses buried in wool. They are the last to fall asleep and the first to wake. Eternal explorers of winter's strange kingdom. The adults fight the cold with wood and labor. But the children? They fight it with imagination. In the dim light of the embers, they whisper stories to one another. Monsters beneath the straw mattress. Ghosts outside the window. Or heroes who can melt snow with a single word. Their voices are hushed, conspiratorial. The way only children can whisper when they're supposed to be asleep. The room smells faintly of smoke and milk. Somewhere, A dog stirs, sighing in its sleep. For the children of the Middle Ages, or of the first American colonies, winter was both wonder and warning. They learned early that the cold wasn't just weather, it was a teacher. It taught patience, gratitude, and the art of stillness. It also taught fear. Frostbite and hunger were not fairy tales. The snow outside was as beautiful as it was cruel. And every story told beside the hearth carried both those truths at once. But to the young, the cold was still a kind of magic. They made games from it. When ice crept across the windows, they traced the frozen patterns with their fingers, calling them the drawings of angels. When the snow piled high, they built forts and tunnels, pretending they lived in secret kingdoms beneath the white world. Laughter echoed across the frost, sharp and bright as the morning light itself. And yet, even their joy carried shadows. Winters could last so long that childhood itself seemed to pause. Work began early, feeding animals, fetching water through snow, mending clothes by dim light. Children were small but essential gears in the household machine. A boy might sleep beside the hearth to tend the fire. A girl might rise before sunrise to stir porridge or sweep frost from the steps. Their hands were small, but their endurance enormous. You can imagine a morning like that now. The fire is weak, the family is stirring, the youngest child, barely 7, shuffles toward the hearth, blanket still around her shoulders. She kneels, blows softly on the coals, and they glow in response. Orange veins pulsing beneath gray ash. A spark catches. The flame rises. She smiles, proud and sleepy. Somewhere behind her, her mother whispers, "Good girl." That single moment, tiny, ordinary, is a triumph. A child keeping her family warm. A spark kept alive. And the laughter, when it comes later in the day, is a kind of victory too. It's defiance against the season itself. You can see them bundled in wool and rags, faces wrapped in scarves, sliding across frozen ponds on carved bits of bone or wood. Their joy makes no sense in this landscape of gray and white. But maybe that's why it matters. To play in the cold is to mock it gently. To tell the world, "You don't scare me." Of course, not every child survived the frost. The graveyards of old villages tell that story in heartbreaking silence. Small stones marked with names that faded too soon. Winter didn't care about innocence. The difference between living and dying was often just a single blanket, a handful of firewood, or the generosity of a neighbor. It's a truth too heavy for small shoulders. Yet somehow they bore it. Historians find traces of that endurance everywhere, in lullabies, in prayers, in the toys carved from leftover wood near the hearth. Parents told their children stories of warmth as both comfort and commandment. "Be good, and spring will come sooner." They'd say, "Help with the fire, and the frost will stay outside." And the children listened, wide-eyed, believing that their kindness might influence the weather itself. You think of your own childhood winters, and suddenly it doesn't feel so far away. The bite of cold air on your skin, the thrill of breath steaming in the morning, the small, inexplicable joy of watching your own reflection blur on a frosted window. The centuries between then and now melt a little, because really, every child who has ever seen snow belongs to the same lineage, the tribe of small dreamers who find beauty in breath and frost. There's an old Scandinavian proverb that says, A child's laughter is the flame that keeps winter from freezing the soul. You can feel the truth of that. In every frozen century, laughter was warmth. Children were the hearths that kept the spirit of humanity from going numb. Picture it now. Night falling again. The house dark except for the faint glow of the coals. The family gathered close, whispering good nights. The smallest child lies between her parents, head resting on her father's arm. She mumbles a question, voice already fading into dream. Will it be warmer tomorrow? Her mother smiles in the dark. Perhaps, but even if it isn't, we'll make it warm, won't we? It's not just comfort, it's instruction. The secret lesson every generation has passed down. Warmth isn't only something you find, it's something you create. Historians rarely write about these moments, the small, human ones that never made it into ledgers or letters. But maybe they're the most important. The quiet acts of care that kept whole families alive. The laughter that rose over frost-bitten mornings. The stories whispered by firelight to chase away fear. You take a breath now, and the air feels lighter, gentler. You imagine that same laughter echoing through time, bouncing off the snow, softening the edges of every cruel winter that's ever been. The world may be frozen, but the children are still playing. And in that sound, that impossible brightness in the middle of the cold, you hear the truest warmth of all. The night has fallen again, thick and still, the kind of silence that makes every small sound, the pop of the fire, the shifting of the straw, even the rhythm of your own breathing, feel impossibly loud. But listen long enough, and you realize the silence isn't empty. The house itself is alive. Its walls are whispering. Every old building has a language of its own, and winter makes it speak. The wood contracts, the stone breathes, the frost creeps in and out like a tide. You can almost hear it, the soft creak of timber settling, the faint snap of ice forming in a beam, the deep, almost human sigh that comes when the wind presses too hard against the roof. It's a conversation older than any family living inside. People used to say that in the dead of winter. Houses remembered. They remembered every sound that had ever echoed within them, footsteps, laughter, prayer, and the cold drew those memories out like ghosts. You'd be lying in bed, staring into the dark, when a floorboard groaned under invisible weight. Someone would whisper, "It's only the frost," but no one ever sounded quite sure. You imagine yourself there now, wrapped in blankets, eyes wide open, the room bathed in the faint orange light of a dying fire. The air hums with little sounds, a crack, a sigh, a whisper. You tell yourself it's just the house settling. But the mind plays tricks in the cold. Every sound feels intentional, every echo familiar. You almost expect the walls to answer if you speak. In medieval times, they didn't dismiss such things as imagination. Houses weren't just wood and stone, they were living spirits. The hearth was sacred, the threshold guarded, and the walls, those silent witnesses, were said to hold both blessings and burdens. Families made offerings when building a new home, a coin beneath the foundation, a drop of wine in the first fire, sometimes even a small charm sealed within the walls to teach them kindness. But over time, kindness can fade, especially through winters like these. Imagine a cottage that has seen 10 generations come and go. Fires burned, babies cried, laughter rose, and prayers echoed within the same four walls. The cold has seeped into its bones. And with it, the memory of everything that ever happened there. On nights like this, when the frost stretches across the glass and the wind hums in the chimney, the walls begin to murmur. Some people swear you can hear it, low, steady rhythm, like breath beneath the wood. There's a story from a 15th-century village in northern England. A woman claimed her cottage whispered her name at night. The priest came to bless it, but when he listened, he said he heard nothing, only the sound of the wind. "Then perhaps the wind knows me," she said, and went on living there for another 20 years. You smile at that. Half superstition, half serenity. Maybe she wasn't afraid. Maybe she understood that the house was just talking back. These sounds weren't always frightening. For many, they were company. A lonely shepherd's wife in rural France once described her home as a friend that never sleeps. The groaning beams and creaking floors kept her from feeling alone after her husband's death. "It speaks," she wrote in her journal, "in a language I can almost understand." You can see why such stories endure. In a world without clocks or hums of electricity, sound was a living thing. Every noise had meaning. When the walls spoke, people listened, and maybe, just maybe, they found comfort in believing that the house itself was awake, watching over them. Even in the grander homes, the same sounds filled the night. Servants swore they heard footsteps in empty corridors, whispers near the hearth, or faint laughter behind doors long closed. The wealthy called it the settling of timbers. But the poor knew better. The dead remember warmth too. They said, "You chuckle softly, imagining the truth somewhere in between. Because if you've ever sat in a quiet house during winter, you know it's alive in ways that defy explanation. The beams shift, the walls click, the roof breathes. It's as if the structure itself is dreaming, turning in its sleep." Historians think the whispering walls phenomenon came from the changing temperatures, wood expanding and contracting, ice melting, air moving through cracks. But knowing the science doesn't make it less magical. In fact, it makes it more so. Because somehow, these little murmurs of the house connect you to every generation who ever lay awake in the same dark, listening. You imagine it. A boy in 1380. A woman in 1720. A farmer in 1850. All lying in bed, hearing the same sounds, wondering the same thing. Who's there? And perhaps the answer has always been the same. It's only time, only memory. There's comfort in that idea, that the walls keep our stories when we can't. Every laugh, every argument, every sigh absorbed into the grain of the wood, waiting to be released on some future cold night. Maybe that's why the house talks. It's trying to remind you that you're not the first to survive this winter. And you won't be the last. The fire flares once, lighting the walls in a warm pulse. You reach out, brush your fingers along the wooden beam beside your bed. It's smooth in some places, splintered in others. It feels almost like skin. You whisper, "Thank you." And for a second, you swear the house exhales. The wind quiets, the creaking stops, the silence feels thick, but not lonely. The walls are listening. Historians might say that's just imagination, a mind softened by darkness and cold. But maybe imagination is the oldest kind of heat, the warmth that lives between belief and reality. You close your eyes, still feeling that faint pulse of warmth where your hand touched the wall. Outside, the wind stirs again, Gentle this time, like a sigh of acknowledgement. The house settles deeper into the night. And so do you. Because some nights, when the fire fades and even dreams have gone still, it's enough to know that something is listening in the dark. The walls fall silent, and the world beyond them begins to stir, the restless world of midnight travelers. While most lie wrapped in straw and wool, there are always those who must move through the dark, messengers, healers, merchants, or the desperate. Out there, the cold doesn't care who you are. The road, frozen and glittering beneath the moon, belongs to no one. You step outside in your imagination, the door groaning open with a sound like the spine of winter itself. The air bites instantly, clean, sharp, absolute. Your breath rises in a white cloud, torn away by the wind before you can see its full shape. Above you, the stars blaze unnaturally bright. The snow beneath your boots crunches, echoing through the empty night like glass breaking. To travel in such weather was both bravery and madness. The cold turned paths into mirrors, rivers into traps, and shadows into tricks. And yet, people did it. They had to. A midwife summoned to a cottage miles away. A messenger carrying word of war. A merchant late to market. A priest bringing last rites to a dying soul. The road, like the cold, was merciless, but duty was stronger. You imagine a lone figure trudging along a frozen track, cloaks snapping in the wind, lanterns swinging at his side. The light barely reaches the ground, just enough to show the ghostly plume of each breath. Somewhere far off, a wolf howls. The traveler pauses, listening. There's no answer, only the endless hush of snow falling from the trees. He moves on. The lantern becomes the heart of the world, a single flame in a sea of black. Every flicker feels alive, fragile, and defiant. You understand now why fire became such a symbol of the human soul. It was what moved through the dark when nothing else dared to. The old roads were cruel even in daylight. In winter, they became treacherous corridors of ice. Wheels froze, horses slipped, bridges cracked under the weight of frost. Travelers learned to listen for the sound of breaking ice beneath snow, the whisper of danger hiding just below the surface. A split second too late, and the world swallowed you whole. There's a chilling record from 16th century Germany of a traveler who wrote, "I rode for 2 hours and heard nothing but my own horse breathing. Then I realized the silence was wrong. He dismounted just before the ice gave way beneath him." You shiver a little, even now, thinking of that kind of silence, the kind that warns without words. But danger wasn't only from nature. Bandits, too, loved the dark. The cold kept people inside, which meant fewer witnesses. Some travelers carried iron pokers or daggers hidden in their boots. Others disguised themselves as monks or pilgrims, hoping no one would risk robbing a holy man. It didn't always work. There are court records full of stories of travelers found frozen, not from weather, but from violence. Still, there were lights along the way, literal and human. Inns and taverns, scattered like oases across the white wilderness. Their windows glowed like promises, warmth, food, safety. A traveler who saw one after hours in the cold might weep with relief. Inside, the fire roared, the ale steamed, and strangers became family for a night. You can almost feel it, the sudden, overwhelming thaw of body and spirit. The clatter of mugs, The laughter that starts quiet, then grows, as the blood returns to everyone's faces. The warmth in those places was not only from fire, but from company, a shared table, a story swapped for bread. In winter, stories were the true currency of the road. Where have you come from? What news from the city? How bad is the frost in the north? Every tale was both map and memory, helping others survive the same journey later. And when the fire dimmed and the voices faded, the inn itself would sigh and settle. The travelers slept side by side in narrow beds or on straw-strewn floors. Boots still on, weapons within reach, the cold clawed at the windows. But no one cared. For one night, they were inside, and that was enough. You can almost see the next morning, a pale dawn creeping over frozen fields. The travelers tightening their cloaks, faces red from the cold. The innkeeper waving from the doorway. Keep your fire lit, he calls. The old farewell of winter. Don't let it die before nightfall. That phrase, simple, human, was more than advice. It was a benediction. Keep your fire lit. It meant, keep your courage. Keep your hope. Keep the part of you that glows even when the world freezes. Historians like to note that these journeys, dangerous, exhausting, often fatal, helped knit early societies together. The exchange of news, goods, letters, and stories between villages and towns didn't just build economies. It built empathy. The traveler was the messenger between worlds, carrying warmth wherever he went. You think of it now, the image of that lone lantern swinging in the dark. One small flame against the vast cold. There's something eternal in it. It's the same light that glowed in hearths, in churches, in children's hands. The same fire that once burned in caves. The same spark you feel even now when you strike a match in the dark. The road ahead glistens with frost. The sky is vast and empty. But the flame in the lantern doesn't waver. It trembles, yes, but it burns on. And maybe that's all any of us are doing in winter. Then or now. Walking through the long night. Carrying what little warmth we have. Hoping it's enough to reach the next door. The next dawn. The next soul in need of light. You take a breath. The cold air bites, but it also wakes you. The road stretches endlessly forward. And behind you, the inn's light fades into memory. The snow crunches beneath your boots. Steady, rhythmic, alive, and for a fleeting moment, you understand the secret of every midnight traveler who ever lived. The fire doesn't just keep you warm, it keeps you moving. The lantern light fades, and the night settles into that eerie quiet just before dawn, the long silence that has unnerved every traveler. Every villager, every soul who's ever watched the world freeze in its sleep. You've walked through the dark long enough to know it. This hour isn't for sound. It's for waiting. The cold has a different texture now. It's not sharp or biting anymore, it's heavy. It presses down on the earth like a weight, muffling everything beneath it. Even the wind has gone still, as though nature itself is holding its breath. Somewhere, an owl calls once and then thinks better of it. The air tastes of iron and smoke. You stop walking, or maybe you never started. Time doesn't move here, it just hangs. Like mist, the road ahead glows faintly with frost. And for a moment, the world feels paused, suspended between darkness and light. Death and life. Past and future. This is the hour that used to frighten even the bravest hearts. Not because of what was there, but because of what wasn't. In old Europe, they called it the wolf hour, the time when the fire burned low, when the last candle guttered, when even the most faithful started to question their prayers. It was said that more people died between 3 and 5 a.m. than at any other time of day. Midwives, priests, and watchmen knew this rhythm well. The soul, they said, grows restless before dawn. You can imagine it. Inside every hut, the same scene plays out. A hearth reduced to dull embers. The faint rattle of a window pane. A mother stirring, sensing the chill before the others. She rises, pulls her shawl close, and adds a small piece of wood to the fire. Sparks leap up like startled birds. The sound is soft but powerful, the first noise after hours of silence. A promise that warmth still exists. Historians believe this wolf hour was when people felt most vulnerable, physically, spiritually, psychologically. The human body reaches its lowest temperature. The mind drifts into its deepest dreams. And if you wake too suddenly, the world feels wrong. Familiar things seem strange. Your own heartbeat sounds like someone knocking from inside your ribs. No wonder they filled these hours with superstition. You picture a monk keeping vigil in a freezing monastery, his candle flickering as he chants alone. You picture a farmer's wife sitting by her dying husband's bedside, watching for a breath that doesn't come. You picture a shepherd staring into the dark, convinced he hears footsteps on the snow. This is the hour when doubt takes form, not as a monster, but as a whisper. What if the sun doesn't rise this time? And yet, it always did. That's the quiet miracle buried in this hour. The fear never won. The fire was always rekindled. The dawn, however late, always arrived. Those who endured the silence learned something profound, that stillness itself has meaning. The long pause before morning wasn't a void, it was a threshold. A kind of breath the world takes before exhaling light. In diaries from colonial America, there are countless mentions of people rising in that hour to stoke fires or say prayers. One entry from a Massachusetts farmer reads, "The cold was deep and the moon pale. But I rose to feed the fire. The silence was holy. I think God moves through the dark just before he shows the sun." You linger on that line, because it feels true even now. There's a holiness to the coldest hour, not because it's gentle, but because it's honest. It strips everything away. Noise, pride, distraction. What's left is only breath, pulse, and hope. You step off the road in your imagination and find a small hill. From there, you can see the faintest blush of light at the horizon, not yet sunrise, but a suggestion of it. The snow reflects it weakly. Like memory, the world hasn't changed, but it feels different. The silence is no longer empty, it's expectant. You realize that this is how people survived the endless winters, not by fighting the darkness, but by waiting through it, by believing that silence is not the end of sound, but the beginning of it. There's a phrase from the 17th century, "Keep the long silence well." It meant to face that deepest quiet with patience, not panic. To understand that the world's stillness isn't punishment, but preparation. You can almost hear it now, that low hum just beneath the cold. Like a heartbeat beneath snow. The fire in your mind flickers. Stronger now. Maybe you've survived this hour, too, many times, in sleepless nights, in losses, in loneliness, Every winter, literal or otherwise, carries its own wolf hour. But somehow, you're still here, still breathing in the frost, still waiting for the light. Historians might call this superstition, or poetic nonsense, but they forget that science can't measure what it feels like to hope in the dark. To wake in the freezing silence and still whisper, "Soon." You look toward the horizon again. The stars are fading one by one. The frost glows silver. The air smells faintly of smoke and dawn. Somewhere behind you, a rooster calls again, not fooled this time, but announcing something real. The long silence is ending. You pull your cloak tighter. The warmth inside you now steady. Quiet, alive. The road waits, but it no longer feels lonely. You've learned the secret all winter wanderers discover eventually. Even the coldest night is just a pause in the story. And sometimes, the quietest moments are the ones that hold the most warmth. And then, finally, the first light comes. At first, it's barely there. Just a thin line of gray that separates the black sky from the frozen ground. You almost doubt it at first, thinking it might just be your eyes playing tricks after too many hours in darkness. But then it grows, slowly, like the world remembering how to breathe. The snow turns from black to silver, then to a pale kind of gold. Every tiny crystal catches that newborn light and throws it back, scattering brilliance across the land. The cold is still fierce, but it feels different now, less like a threat, more like a companion you've learned to live with. You exhale, and the steam from your breath mixes with dawn itself. You've made it through the night. For the people who lived through those winters, whether in medieval hamlets, colonial villages, or lonely farmhouses, the first light wasn't just morning. It was resurrection, a small, daily miracle. Each sunrise proved that warmth still existed somewhere, that the fire inside hadn't been for nothing. You imagine a scene in a small settlement. The roofs glisten with frost, and the chimneys begin to smoke again one by one, like old giants waking from sleep. Somewhere, a rooster crows. A child stirs under blankets and yawns. A mother leans over the fire pit, coaxing the embers back to life. The crackle that follows is the sweetest sound in the world. In that pale light, even hardship looks softer. The world seems almost kind for a moment. The faces that looked gaunt by firelight now glow with a quiet dignity. These are people who've learned to meet the dawn with gratitude, because they know what it means to earn it. It's easy to forget now. In a world where warmth comes from switches and buttons, that dawn once felt like a reward. For medieval farmers and settlers, the first task of every morning was rekindling the fire. They called it bringing back the sun, a poetic name for a practical job, blowing life into the gray ashes, feeding them with straw and breath until they caught flame again. You can almost hear it, the faint hiss of smoke, the little sigh of relief as the spark flares into orange. That small moment, multiplied across thousands of homes, must have been what kept humanity alive. Breath, flame, patience, repetition. Historians sometimes say that civilization is built on mornings like that, on the people who knew how to turn yesterday's ashes into today's fire. As the sun climbs higher, the frost begins to melt from the windows. Drops of water slide down the glass like tears thawing from the world's face. The air smells faintly of pine and smoke and bread. People stretch stiff arms, feed animals, sweeps snow from thresholds. The village awakens like a choir, slowly, in harmony, each movement adding to the rhythm of life returning. You picture the faces of children seeing their own breath in the morning light, chasing it just for fun. You picture a man stepping outside, lifting his hands toward the sun not to pray, but to feel that first touch of warmth on skin after so many frozen nights. It must have felt like grace itself. There's a curious peace in the thaw. Though it's fragile, the snow will still fall again. The nights will still return. But for now, there's reprieve, and humans, being who they are, waste no time in turning survival into celebration. Morning meals become feasts of gratitude. Bread toasted over coals. Milk warmed till it steams. Porridge sweetened with the last of the honey. Even in the harshest centuries, people marked the first thaw with joy. In medieval Europe, there were candle mornings, little gatherings where families lit every candle they owned at once to help the sun find its way back. It was half ritual, half rebellion, and entirely human. You imagine that glow now, hundreds of tiny flames flickering against frostbitten windows, chasing shadows away. The air inside smells of beeswax and smoke and hope. Someone laughs. Someone sings a line of a hymn they barely remember. Someone whispers, "Spring will come soon." That's how it always begins, the thaw not of the earth, but of the heart. It's easy to romanticize these scenes now, to imagine them bathed in gentle light and courage. But you know the truth was harder. The thaw brought mud, flooding, sickness from melting rot. It was messy, raw, imperfect, but that's what made it sacred. Warmth, like life, was never clean, it was always earned. And yet, that mess, those puddles, that dripping, that stubborn persistence, was proof of triumph. The frozen world was loosening its grip. The cycle of warmth and cold, despair and hope, was turning again. You take a breath now, and the air feels alive, carrying both chill and promise. The horizon burns brighter, and the snow shines like glass. Somewhere nearby, a single bird calls, a thin, wavering note that sounds impossibly brave. For centuries, people believed birds carried messages from the divine. Maybe that's why their songs always seem to arrive when we need them most. A reminder that even the smallest voice can break the silence of winter. You think about the long night you've just imagined, how it felt endless. How it felt like it would never give way. And yet here it is, morning. The proof that patience has purpose. That light always remembers where to find us. Historians can tell you the dates and the methods, the fire-starting tools and the architecture of chimneys. But they can't measure the feeling of that first sunbeam cutting through the frost. The word for it doesn't exist, not in English. Not anywhere. It's too quiet, too simple. It's the sound of thawing. The warmth of belief returning. The realization that you have survived once again. You close your eyes, feel the dawn on your face. And for a moment, you're one of them, the farmers, the travelers, the dreamers who waded through the dark and still found the strength to smile at the morning. The long night has passed. The fire lives, and the world, against all odds, is warm again. The sun is higher now. Gold spilling across a world still shivering but undeniably alive. The frost is melting, the rivers are stirring, and smoke curls lazily from chimney after chimney like soft, slow prayers. You'd think the story ends here, morning triumphant. Warmth restored, but survival, in truth, never stops at sunrise. The day brings its own kind of struggle. And its own kind of guardians, the firekeepers of the New World. When the first settlers crossed the Atlantic and landed on the harsh coasts of early America, they brought with them everything they could: iron tools, grain, wool, a few precious books, and one small, fragile thing: the memory of fire. The New World was wild, vast, and merciless in winter. Forests stretched forever. Snow fell for weeks. The wind came howling off the mountains like something alive. And yet, in the middle of all that, humans did what they've always done. They built fires and promised to keep them burning. You can picture it now. A small cluster of wooden cabins half buried in snow. The air so cold that even the smoke seems to move slowly. Inside one of those cabins, a woman tends a hearth that never goes out. Her hair smells of wood smoke. Her fingers are cracked and raw. She leans close, breathes softly onto the embers, and feeds them another piece of wood. It's not just warmth she's protecting, it's life itself. For many early settlers, losing the fire meant disaster. Matches were rare, flint was precious, and winter was unrelenting. If the hearth died, someone had to fetch flame from a neighbor's cabin or even from miles away. There are stories of people trudging through snowstorms carrying glowing coals in covered pots. Their faces half frozen, their arms trembling. They'd return home, cradle the ember like an infant, and whisper thanks as it caught again. You feel that image linger, the small, glowing heart of civilization carried from house to house, generation to generation. It wasn't technology that tamed the cold. It was care. The firekeeper wasn't always a formal title, but it became a role, sometimes assigned, sometimes inherited. In many indigenous cultures of North America, firekeeping was sacred. Certain tribes believed the flame was a living spirit, a bridge between the human world and the divine. The person who tended it had to remain pure of heart and focused of mind. Even during migration, one fire was always kept alive, carried from camp to camp so the community's spirit would never die. You imagine them, moving through snowy forests, wrapped in hides, their steps deliberate, in a small pot or bark bundle. Glowing coals pulse like captured dawn. Every few hours, the keeper stops, kneels, and breathes gently into it, feeding it with dry grass. That same fire might have been lit by an ancestor years earlier. It might live for generations. The settlers, though less ceremonial, understood the same truth. Every home had its keeper, usually the mother, the one who rose before dawn to relight the hearth, who guarded it through the long day. Diaries from early colonial women often mention their fires with the tenderness reserved for children. "She burns low this morning." Or, "My fire sleeps. I will coax her to wake." Fire was genderless, ageless, beyond class or creed. It was the one equalizer that demanded devotion. If you failed it, it failed you. Historians often overlook this daily labor. They write about wars, trade, politics, but rarely about the quiet constancy of those who simply kept the fire alive. And yet, it was that constancy that made everything else possible. Without the hearth, no bread would bake, no tools would forge, no families would gather. Civilization itself, you realize, rests on the patience of those whose names history forgot. Even children learned early what it meant to be a firekeeper. In some households, the youngest was trusted with feeding the coals while parents worked. There's an old frontier saying, if you can tend the fire, you can tend your own life. You can almost hear the lessons whispered over crackling logs. Don't let it burn too fast. Don't let it starve, stay close. But don't touch too long. Every instruction about fire was a metaphor waiting to be understood. You think of how those same habits live on today. We still check our thermostats, guard our stoves, huddle around heaters. The tools have changed, but the impulse hasn't. Somewhere inside every modern comfort is the echo of that woman blowing on the embers before dawn. There's something beautifully human about the way we treat warmth as if it needs reassurance, how we still stare into flames, hypnotized, as if to remind ourselves that control over light and heat is the oldest victory we ever earned. But the firekeepers of the New World didn't just fight cold. They fought isolation. In the long winters, when travel was impossible and snow buried everything, the hearth became the center of existence. Around it, families told stories, sang hymns, mended clothes, whispered dreams. It was their sun, their altar, their beating heart. And when travelers or neighbors knocked on the door, that same fire became hospitality itself. Come in, warm yourself, was more than politeness, it was survival. You picture one of those evenings now, a knock at the door, the wind howling behind it, the fire flares as the door opens, the room glows amber, the snow outside gleaming blue. Someone steps in, shaking frost from their cloak, and the smell of pine smoke welcomes them before any word does. They sit, stretch their hands toward the heat, and for a while, the world feels merciful again. There's an old belief from the Appalachian settlers that every hearth kept a record of every kindness shown beside it. Each time you offered warmth to a stranger, your fire burned brighter that night. No science, no proof, just a superstition born from gratitude. But maybe they were right in a way. Maybe every act of shared warmth, however small, adds up to the slow thawing of the world. You look into the imagined fire now, and its light dances across everything, past and present, old world and new, faith and survival. You can almost hear the whisper of generations breathing life into the same flame. Historians still debate what truly allowed those early settlers to endure the impossible winters. Was it their resourcefulness, their faith, their trade with native peoples? Or was it something quieter, their ability to keep one flame alive? Night after night, century after century? Maybe that's the truest kind of heritage, not the stories we tell, but the embers we pass forward. You lean closer to the flame in your mind, and it flares gently, warm and gold. Outside, the snow is still deep, but the house feels alive, its breath rising softly through the chimney. Somewhere, a new generation stirs, unaware that the warmth touching their skin is the same fire, reborn again and again through loving, patient hands. The firekeepers are gone now, but their lesson burns still. Guard the warmth, feed it carefully, pass it on, because if the cold teaches anything, it's this: light only matters when it's shared. The fire burns low again, as it always does. The world outside is still white, still endless, but the danger now isn't out there, it's creeping in. Because sometimes, no matter how many logs you burn or blankets you stack, The cold finds its way inside. It slips through the smallest cracks. It seeps into walls and bones alike. And once it's in, it changes everything. You can almost feel it. That first quiet invasion. The air in the room sharpens. Your breath thickens. The window panes frost over from the inside, growing delicate white forests that bloom and vanish by the hour. Even the furniture seems to groan beneath the weight of the chill. It's not the biting cold of outdoors, it's something slower, more intimate, the kind that doesn't freeze you all at once. It just lingers, whispering, "You can't keep me out forever." In the old world, this was when the real trouble began. Fires could be stoked, yes, but supplies dwindled, food froze, pipes, if you had them, cracked like bones. Bread went hard, milk turned to stone, and for the poorest, the cold wasn't a visitor, it was a roommate. It sat beside them at every meal, slept under the same roof, sometimes even in the same bed. There are journals from the colonial period that tell of the still months, when families stopped speaking much. Words froze on their tongues. It seemed people conserved energy, not just for their bodies, but for their spirits. The only voices were the pop of the fire and the creak of the wood as the cold tightened its grip. You imagine that kind of silence now, a family sitting by the hearth, each lost in thought. The flames dance weakly, throwing long shadows across the floor. A child coughs. The father rubs his hands together, staring into the fire as though it's a dying friend. The mother adds another log, watching it hiss, and mutters softly, "Stay with us." She doesn't mean it to sound like a prayer, but it is one. When the cold came inside, people changed. They grew smaller, quieter, older. Movements became deliberate, voices softer. Every action was weighed against the cost of warmth. Do you open the door? Do you fetch more wood? Do you eat cold bread to save the flame for another night? Survival became a calculation of small mercies. And yet, there was beauty in that, too, a strange intimacy, when the world shrank to the size of a single warm room. People saw one another differently. The firelight softened even the hardest faces. Old grudges melted a little in the shared effort to stay alive. Sometimes, the cold didn't just enter the house, it humbled it. There's a letter from a farmer's wife in 1743 that reads, "The frost has made us all kind. I think the Lord uses the cold to remind us we are one breath, one fire." You can almost hear her smile as she wrote it, wrapped in blankets, ink freezing between words. But the cold could also break the spirit. When the wood ran out, when hunger gnawed louder than the wind, desperation took root. Entire villages huddled together in barns, taking turns to sleep closest to the fire. Sometimes, they didn't wake. In the records of the harshest winters, the Little Ice Age, as historians call it, there are stories of churches filled not with worshippers, but with families seeking heat. The fires burned day and night, and yet the air stayed cruel. Still, somehow, humanity didn't vanish, it adapted. If the cold came inside, people learned to answer with warmth of their own. They made soup that simmered for hours, filling the air with scent and hope. They sang songs not because they were happy, but because their breath and voices made the room feel less empty. Even laughter, quiet and rare, was an act of rebellion. You picture it now, a child tracing frost on the wall, laughing at the strange shapes it makes. A father telling a story just to distract from the hunger. A mother sewing patches on a blanket with trembling fingers. Humming softly. These are the moments that the cold can't conquer, the small, glowing proofs that life continues even when everything else stops. There's an old saying from the Norse sagas. Fire is a guest in the house. It stays only if you honor it. Maybe warmth itself is like that. It doesn't just live in wood or wool, it lives in care. In attention. In the decision to tend instead of surrender. And so, when the cold came inside, the battle wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Every act of kindness became a spark. Sharing the last bit of bread. Letting someone else sit closer to the flame. Whispering, "You'll be all right," even when you weren't sure yourself. Those were the real fires that kept people alive. Historians often talk about great inventions, the chimney, the stove, the insulation, but the truth is simpler. The greatest invention was compassion. The warmth that people created between themselves, not around themselves. You can almost see it, a house dimly lit, its windows rimmed with frost, its air heavy with the scent of smoke and humanity. There are no grand speeches, no miracles, just people breathing, sharing, enduring. The fire flickers lower, and someone leans forward to feed it one last log. The light swells again, casting their faces in gold. For a brief, precious moment, the room is bright enough to forget the cold altogether. You sit there with them in your imagination, feeling that same fragile heat. You know it won't last. Not forever. The cold will return tomorrow. And the next day. But that's the rhythm of every winter. Every life. Warmth. Loss. Rekindling. The cold will always come inside. And so will the fire. Morning fades again, as all mornings do, into the soft hush of another winter evening. The fire burns low, gentle and steady, a quiet heartbeat in the room. You can almost feel it, the rhythm of life slowing down with the season. The world settling into something ancient and patient. This is the sleep of the season, when even time seems to pull a blanket over itself. Outside, the snow falls without sound. Each flake drifts like a memory, landing softly on rooftops, fences, the bare black branches of trees that look like ink drawn against the pale sky. Inside, the warmth glows amber, and the air smells faintly of wood, wool, and rest. The day is over. The work is done. For now, survival can wait. You sit close to the fire, feeling the weight of centuries in its glow. Every flame is a thread that connects you backward, to monks in stone abbeys, settlers in wooden cabins, mothers in frost-bitten cottages, children wrapped in patched quilts. Every breath of warmth they kept alive has somehow reached you here. You're part of the same story now. The same quiet defiance against the endless cold. The world outside sleeps, and so does history. The snow hides everything sharp, everything broken, smoothing it all into peace. Even the houses seem to breathe slower. Their walls, the whispering ones, have gone silent at last. There's nothing left to say. You can almost hear it, the rhythm of sleep settling over the land. The gentle sigh of wind through the chimney. The slow crackle of the hearth. Somewhere, a dog dreams, its paws twitching in a rhythm older than words. Somewhere, a child murmurs in her sleep, smiling at something warm. And you, still sitting by the fire, Begin to understand what all those long winters were teaching. That warmth isn't a thing you hold in your hands. It's a thing you carry inside. It's faith. It's patience. It's memory. It's the small, stubborn belief that no matter how long the dark lasts, morning will always return. Historians still argue about how they survived, the Americans of the Middle Ages. The settlers, the dreamers, but maybe the answer was never scientific. Maybe they survived because they learned to rest with the cold, not against it, because they discovered the secret rhythm of winter: breathe, endure, wait, trust. You look into the last of the firelight. The coals pulse like red stars, their glow softening with every breath of air. The shadows on the wall move lazily, like old friends stretching before sleep. There's no fear left now. Only quiet, only calm. The house, the land, the very air, they're all exhaling together. The long night isn't an enemy anymore. It's a blanket, the same one that covered every ancestor who came before you. So you lean back, you breathe. You let the warmth wash through you like slow honey. Outside, the wind hums a lullaby older than language. Inside, the last light fades. The story has come full circle, fire to frost, night to morning, silence to song, and now, at last, it's time to rest. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into this final quiet together. The cold is gentle now. The world is breathing. You are warm. The fire flickers once, twice, and then becomes a glow behind your eyelids. Everything is still. Everything is safe. Everything is softly fading away. End of script. Sweet dreams.